India Legal makes the difference because we bring you only the news that counts.
India Legal, stories that count.
Hello and welcome to another special readout from India Legal magazine. As you know, we are the nation's first political legal independent weekly focusing on controversial issues of national and international importance. The video readouts we present to you regularly are the editorial team's choice of the most significant stories we believe should receive close scrutiny and wide circulation. You can watch them along with the visuals or listen to them as you would a podcast. In this week's readout, we focus on the subject of electoral bonds. Now, term sounds innocuous and something perhaps even forbidding, and something that belongs in the financial sections of newspapers that only businessmen and stockholders read. Actually, this little understood practice or phenomenon impacts the very lifeblood of Indian democracy. It affects the way you and I vote for our government and which party wins. See, more easily understood is the phrase big money and politics. It is now commonly understood that billions of rupees are spent by political parties to spend on the elections. Elections are big business. And the commonly held belief is that parties and candidates with the biggest bucks get the biggest electoral bang. Now, this may not always be true, but political reformers have tried in all democratic countries to ensure transparency in the money-raising methods so that oligarchs and fat cats do not gain or buy the political process as it were a product or a commodity of commerce. In India, there are checks and balances and strict accounting procedures enforced by the Election Commission. But of late, critics have argued that the whole system has been compromised with the introduction of electoral bonds, which allow big business to pour money into the political parties without transparency or accountability. In this week's video commentary, I read from an incisive article penned for our magazine by India Legal Bureau under the guidance of Banishka Garg, our legal associate. We pose the question, is this electoral bonds system an opaque scheme? It has run into rough weather ever since it began, and the court, that's the Supreme Court, will be hearing petitions challenging it. They allege that it has opened the doors to unlimited, unchecked funding of the political parties in the country. The Supreme Court is likely to begin hearing a clutch of petitions challenging the electoral bond scheme pretty soon. Its decision could impact the funding of different political parties and therefore is much awaited. Now, let me explain further. As our Bureau report notes, electoral bonds are instruments in the nature of promissory notes which can be purchased by any Indian citizen or body incorporated in India to donate money to political parties. These bonds are issued by authorized branches of the State Bank of India in denominations of 1,000 rupees, 10,000 and up to 1 crore. The bonds can be purchased by donors anonymously by making payment from a bank account. A political party can then encash them through a designated bank account with the authorized bank as against the conventional practice of funding through cash. The bonds are valid for 15 days from the date of issue. Furthermore, only those political parties which are registered under Section 29A of the Representation of People's Act of 1951 and which secured not less than 1% of the votes polled in the last general election to the House of the People or a legislative assembly are eligible to receive electoral bonds. The scheme was introduced by the Centre in 2018 in a bid to cleanse the system of electoral funding in the country. The then Finance Minister Arun Jaitley first announced the idea of electoral bonds in his budget speech of 2017-2018. It was quite a memorable speech. He said, Even 70 years after independence, the country has not been able to evolve a transparent method of funding political parties, which is vital to the system of free and fair elections. Political parties continue to receive most of their funds through anonymous donations, which are shown in cash. An effort, therefore, is required to be made to cleanse the system of political funding in India. That's what Arun Jaitley said, the late Arun Jaitley. The main changes proposed included reducing cash donations to a political party from rupees 20,000 to 2,000, which seems unworkable, but anyway, it was done. The speech also outlined the contours of electoral bonds to bring about clean money and substantial transparency in political funding. Jaitley, finance minister at that time, said, "India is the largest democracy in the world. However, despite strengthening the various institutions for the last 7 decades, India has not been able to evolve a transparent political funding system. Elections and political parties are fundamental feature of parliamentary democracy. Elections cost money. The around-the-year functioning of political parties involves huge sums of expenditure. Parties run offices throughout the country, staff salaries, travelling expenses, establishment costs are regular expenditures. All these are the regular expenditures of political parties." And that's what Arun Jaitley said, and he was right. Now, under the Finance Act of 2017, a new system was introduced for the electoral, for the bond system to be issued by any scheduled bank for the purpose of electoral funding. The Finance Act was passed as a money bill, which meant that it did not require the assent of the Rajya Sabha. Now, challenging this scheme, a bunch of petitions were filed before the apex court, Supreme Court, in 2019, alleging that the scheme was distorting democracy. The petitions were filed by NGOs, among them the Association for Democratic Reforms. A separate petition was filed by the Communist Party of India, Marxist. The petitions challenged the amendments made to various statutes to introduce the scheme on the ground that the same had opened doors to unlimited, unchecked funding to political parties in the country. The petitions highlighted that the ill effects of the amendments are that the annual contribution reports of political parties do not have to be to mention the details of those contributions by way of electoral bonds, thereby killing transparency in political funding and creating a potential burden for the Election Commission. Now, the scheme was also challenged for opening avenues of foreign contributions to Indian political parties, inasmuch as it threatens India's autonomy and democracy. In March 2021, a bench headed by Chief Justice of India, S.A. Bobde, had dismissed an application moved by the Association for Democratic Reforms, ADA, ahead of the assembly elections. This demanded that any fresh sale of electoral bonds be stayed. Referring to the petitioner's claim that the buyers of the bonds had complete anonymity, the top court observed that it is not as though the operations under the scheme are behind iron curtains, incapable of being seen by whoever wants to see them. So, on this basis, they dismissed the application. The court noted that the sale of these bonds, which began in January 2018, continued without any impediment in 2018, 2019 and 2020. Ever since its introduction, the scheme has received severe criticism by many who believe that its opaque nature appears to undermine the intent of behind introducing it in the first place. Critics further believe that the electoral bond scheme removes all pre-existing restrictions and paves the way for crony capitalism. It is now crucial for the government to plug the loopholes in the existing laws to make the mechanism more accountable and transparent. And the hope across the country is that the apex court will deliver a judgment that strengthens and protects the electoral process as envisaged in the Constitution and strengthens democracy. This is your host editor, Inderjit Badhwar. Until next time, goodbye for now.
India Legal, stories that count.